Good morning. My name is Katera Clark, and I'm the current president of the Black Students Association here at Worcester. Before we begin, I'd like to take a brief moment of silence to recognize the lives we have lost to both police brutality and acts of hateful discrimination throughout American history. Thank you. Now, I would like to thank you all for tuning in to this very different version of our traditional Martin Luther King Jr. Day events. We as an institution take this day off from courses and work to dedicate our energy toward becoming more understanding and educated on social justice issues surrounding our current communities. This MLK Day and the following events are as important as ever because we have found ourselves facing numerous situations in the past year which call out the many, many cracks in our social, political, and educational systems across the United States. Because of things like COVID 19, social justice movements like Black Lives Matter mobilizing for change, and a monumental election season, we find ourselves as students, mentors, and educators in the urgent and powerful position to quite literally be the change we wish to see. There's a fierce urgency of now in virtually every aspect of our lives because of the unpredictable nature and the way society is today. And while the past year has been one of the hardest for many people, and most of my peers included, it provides us the perfect motivation to value and strengthen our education as academics and as people. Now, as a generation college student, I'll be the first one to admit prioritizing education in times of a pandemic and increased social tension is really almost impossible to do. But when I take a little step back, I realize and recognize how far my education and better understanding of several diverse social justice issues has contributed to my strength as a Black woman in the United States specifically. It is, to me, the most vital thing I will take away from my college experience. We all, as students, mentors, and educators, have immense power. We have the opportunity to educate ourselves on both the history behind these unjust institutions and as well as current issues we face in our own communities today. We are in the position to learn from others about the issues that you might not be aware of or exposed to in your own everyday life. And with this exposure and education comes a strength to carry ourselves in a more conscious and deliberate manner. My peers, we must use our newfound knowledge from our time at Worcester and the events today to keep the fight and fire ignited within us. To our mentors and educators, you must continue to inspire and improve our knowledge without ego or bias. And we all must find ways to come together for the strength of our community and diversity. Education allows us to grow and transform into stronger people both mentally and socially. It is no longer okay to fly under that radar of social consciousness. And to succeed in this new era of social justice and change, we must make that effort to step out of our comfort zones and work together for the causes that are overdue for transformation. Remember, you can only see as far as you can think, and a strong and purposeful education can transform all of us into catalysts for the necessary movements needed for generations to come. I humbly thank you for listening. And at this time, I would like to introduce our president, Sarah Bolton.
Welcome. My tremendous thanks today go to Dr. Yvonne Garcia and to everyone on the Martin Luther King Day Committee for creating today's celebration by which we honor the legacy, the vision, the courage, and the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in fighting racism and creating a more just democratic society. Dr. King's extraordinary efforts changed this country profoundly, and they are a beacon for our way forward on so much that still needs to change. Dr. King was killed 53 years ago, but our reflections on his life are not only about history. The struggle to create a truly inclusive, egalitarian democracy free of racism and discrimination is current, and it's urgent, and it will take all of us to move it forward, here on Worcester's campus, as well as across the country and around the world. Today provides an opportunity to reflect on our own lives and on the actions we each must take to extinguish racism and to create justice. While the Martin Luther King Day of Service is an annual celebration, Martin Luther King Day of 2021 is unlike any other in our history. In the years since we last gathered to celebrate the last Martin Luther King Day, we have been immersed in dual, interwoven pandemics, a pandemic of COVID-19 and a pandemic of lethal, racist violence. These pandemics demonstrate so clearly and so terribly painfully how far we have yet to go to become a truly just nation, finally free of the deadly harms of racism, a nation where people can finally hold the equal rights to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness that are named in the Declaration of Independence, but that have yet to be fully realized for so many. The COVID pandemic has amplified and laid bare profound inequities in access to necessities like healthcare and employment. Racism, redlining, and discrimination, injustices against which Martin Luther King mobilized a nation, mean that low-income communities and communities of color bear a tremendously unequal burden in illness and in death due to COVID-19, with Black and Latinx folks far more likely to have access only to overcrowded and under-resourced hospitals, and with Black and Latinx folks 3 times as likely to die from COVID-19 as white Americans. They are also twice as likely to face serious financial crises, such as food and housing insecurity. And the public health crisis of COVID-19 coincides with other persistent and relentless threats to communities of color, including lethal violence against Black people and others from marginalized communities. George Floyd's killing on May 25th is part of a relentless pattern of racist violence enacted against thousands of Black people, most often by those who are white. This pattern is hundreds of years old. It starts with slavery and still, appallingly, is happening today. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. We say their names and we know that theirs are just a few of the many lives lost to racism. In the last week, the horrifying violent attack on the US Capitol showed us again that democracy is precious and also that it faces real threats. And again, just as when Martin Luther King marched at Selma, we see racism and white supremacy at the core of efforts to stifle representative democracy, with the Confederate flag and other racist symbols being marched through the Capitol in Washington, D.C. So we're living in extremely difficult times, as Dr. King did as well. And we ask ourselves, how can we look forward? Today, we turn to many of Dr. King's books and speeches for inspiration. Those books and speeches read as if they could have been written today, as we continue to face the persistent life and death issues of structural inequality, white supremacy, and racist violence. Throughout his life, Dr. King asked again and again, what actions will make a difference? He wrote of the power of nonviolent protest, as well as the importance of the role of civil rights law. And he insisted on the absolute necessity of the transformation of individual perspective among those who hold privilege. Dr. King reminds us that progress requires both urgent action and constant reflection, both a commitment to work relentlessly for justice and a commitment to honestly examine one's own ideas and biases and to change them. With those tools and with extraordinary courage, he moved mountains, and he shows us the way forward as well. In his speech at the 1963 March on Washington, Dr. King said this, quote, "We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children." Unquote. It is that action that we engage in together today with the help of our wonderful speakers and leaders. And we must continue to commit to it in the days ahead and in the years ahead so that we can create a fully just community here on our campus and across our society in the United States as well as around the world. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mamadou Ndiaye, who graduated from Worcester with a degree in cognitive behavioral neuroscience in 2014. Mamadou is a prolific and award-winning comedian. He's a TV and film writer, a filmmaker, and an artist and creative consultant around issues of racial justice, climate justice, and mental health. He works with nonprofits such as The Color of Change and the Hip Hop Caucus, as well as on shows on Comedy Central and Amazon and Netflix. Mamadou is currently developing By Us, For Us, a late-night sketch talk show centering Black voices for Color of Change. And he's developing Flyovers, which is a half-hour dramedy about being Black and African in the rural Midwest. He's also working on DC's #2 Detective Agency, which is an animated half-hour comedy set in the DC universe. Mamadou is a winner of 2019's Yes and Laughter Lab for his pilot Franklin, and he's also a 2020 Sundance Fellow for his pilot Griot, which is an animated anthology that centers the stories of the African diaspora. Thank you, Mamadou, for joining us today, and welcome back to Worcester.
Hi, you're probably wondering why I, Mamadou Ndiaye, am here to talk to you about the urgency of now. I guess we'll find out later. But first, students, thanks for pulling up. Faculty, staff, great to virtually see you. Trustees, donors, my Venmo handle is... When I was approached to give this keynote address for the college, I was honored. I was told it was going to be a virtual address, that I get to pre-record it, and I decided, why not pull out all the stops, get some bells and whistles, and try to make this as interesting and fun an experience as I can. So, here we go. Before I get started, I wanted to have a special shout out to the frontline workers going all the way from healthcare personnel to our delivery drivers who risked it every day to make sure that we combated COVID-19 correctly and safely in 2020 and beyond. Another special shout out to the activists and volunteers on the ground who helped us identify and spread information about voter suppression to safely exercise our right to vote in a democratic election and to rid our country of a maniacal and sometimes accidentally Machiavellian fascist dickhead who has more open cases than an episode of Deal or No Deal. And finally, shout out to science. Big ups researchers and scientists working around the clock fighting an uphill battle through misinformation and, well, pure Trump brand f***ery every single day to help us deliver a vaccine for COVID-19. Without Dr. Anthony Fauci and Dr. Dolly Parton working 9 to 5 and then overtime, I don't know where we'd be today. And a special no shout out to scammers, who will probably be trying to sell bootleg vaccines on the street made out of expired Fabuloso, wheatgrass, and a hint of apple cider vinegar, truly the Dr. Pepper of vaccines. I think one of the most interesting things about college is that everyone has a 4-year memory of their time there, and then after they graduate, it's like the school is supposed to shut down or something. I mean, honestly, it was wild to me that Worcester called me to speak, so I thought it shut down in 2014. I don't think that's the case when it comes to Worcester, though, because a lot of Worcester graduates, myself included, are lifelong learners, finding opportunities to make impacts all around the world using what they learned at Worcester, and also what they learned from their own individual experiences that got them into Worcester, and then got them through Worcester, and what got them out of Worcester. I think I say Worcester enough times. Q, make sure that check clears. That's one thing that I really took from my Worcester experience. It was a little charcuterie board of taste testing a lot of different ideologies, walks of life, disciplines, majors, styles, etc. And I just caught this, please, for God's sake, don't start saying things like charcuterie when picking majors. I will lose it. I came to Worcester through a very unorthodox means, going to the school that my dad taught at because it was in town. My dad is a professor of Africana Studies for almost my entire life, so I grew up reading books, exploring different political ideologies, learning a lot. In fact, while my classmates were out playing sports, figuring out their sexuality, experimenting with drugs, I was writing book reports on Nelson Mandela. That's not a flex, I just happen to know a lot about Nelson Mandela now. I can't escape it. In my time at Worcester, I was the traditional over-involved student, trying to be part of every single club, every single activity, everything. I studied cognitive behavioral neuroscience because I wanted to understand how people ticked on a behavioral level, and then tie it to the different phenomena that I grew up not really fully understanding. Prejudice, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and why no one knew a lot about Africa. This of course led me to writing my IS using Dr. Anthony Greenwald's IAT, or implicit association test, but that wasn't the end for me. You see, after I graduated, I continued to study and read up on a lot of social neuro. Not because I'm a giant nerd, I am that, but I moved to New York and became a 7th grade science teacher, which really taught me how to bridge the gap between a high-level concept and its building blocks. It also taught me that there are specific building blocks that go missing or are skipped because of different priorities within the United States education system, especially in a city like New York. I'm Black, I'm Muslim, I'm a first-generation immigrant from Mauritania and Mali, and a cisgender male, so I see the world in a very specific way. But being all of those things in a country that doesn't value a lot of those identities forced me to navigate my surroundings rather than just live in them. Following my educational path at Worcester, it led me to a lot of opportunities to try and explain how I see the world to a lot of different people. But one thing that I learned along the way is that not a lot of people want to see the world through your lens. I found something interesting in the way that I looked at the world given my educational, personal, and professional experiences at the time. I could see why people believed what they believed based on their experiences. That didn't mean that I tacitly agreed with their perspective, but if I found out more key information about people and sat down and thought about it, using whatever skills I still had from neuroscience research, especially in the perception and action department, I wouldn't personally outright dispose of somebody based on what they believed, but that wouldn't always be afforded to me. Recently, we've called upon each other to be more accountable for our own growth and each other's. I find that people are expecting other people to have fully built houses with none of the tools or even a foundation in place to understand another person's differing point of view. I don't think people understand there's no going back to normal, there's only forward, and it is our responsibility to use what we learn in the world to heal and build a better one. Listen. I am a 29-year-old dork with extreme social anxiety recovering from a TBSP of PTSD, so I spend a lot of time in my head. But through work on myself, I found that my experience, believe it or not, and this might shock you, is not everyone's experience. I'm aware that my positionality as a person who has navigated a large section of the population who doesn't understand some of the cultural complexities that come with Blackness, Africanness, Islam, etc., are my experience and my experience alone. However, when applied to research, I found some easy paths back to the root of the miscommunication and misinformation surrounding some of the big social traumas that we are still experiencing today. I was asked to come here and talk about the urgency of now. However, how do you even talk about a moment without talking about how we got to it? How do you get to the next moment without understanding the moment you're in? How do you better yourselves without finding out what went wrong in the first place? These are questions I ask myself all the time, and a lot of us have been asking ourselves over the last year. I'd like to offer how I perceive the urgency of now by detailing how I see the world as not only a creative, but as a queer, Black, African, Muslim man in the world. I work as a comedian and a writer, both very goofball things to do after pump faking a neuroscience career. Every single day of my life, I have to work on not only proving to my African parents that this is a viable career path, putting Mali, Mauritania, and sometimes Senegal on my back while doing so, but I have to meet people where they are, with every single joke, to try and understand what audiences understand, and try and expand it using my point of view. Even more so in my writing, where I have to imagine different scenarios for different characters and how they interact given their own idiosyncrasies in given situations. People always ask me how I made the jump from cognitive behavioral neuroscience to comedy, and the answer is easy. Observation. One of the key principles of science is observing change, observing differences over time, and explaining it using research. And some of the best comedy comes from the hyper-specific characteristics of watching a situation play out and either analyzing, dramatizing, or satirizing it. Too many stories come from the same perspective in my industry, and for some reason, the trend of people of color playing secondary and tertiary characters to white cis heterosexual protagonists continues to come up. How do we teach people using one of the most widespread forms of cultural communication that people of color can be centered in the conversation if all we continue to show them are people of color on the fringes of white conversations? If somebody can imagine a TV show, a movie, a cartoon with layers and themes, then we can absolutely imagine better systems for us as people who live in the real world. We can imagine a more colorful tapestry of characters inclusive of queer people, disabled people, BIPOC people from all around the world. And that's how I write. I always think, how can I create more space than I take up to invite other people into my stories? Everyone has perspective, whether you're a writer or not. But when you are a writer, having a strong, nuanced perspective on a situation and an ability to see everyone else's outlook, fictional or not, is your best friend. Perspective is the cornerstone of a good story, a good show. Having a well-rounded point of view on a story helps clarify gray areas. The details assist in painting a full picture and weaving a richer narrative. While we all have different perspectives on moments and incidents that we all trade on social media based on our media diets and our personal experiences, the dominant source of our cultural perspective right now is still super white. Or stolen from people of color, which is, now that I think about it, still super white. Okay, don't blame me, blame history. Why the normative perspective is white comes from everywhere. Who is in power? Who decides what stories are being told? Who decides what stories make it to the masses? Who is behind the camera? Who is writing the articles and think pieces? Are they writing it from the perspective of being part of the story, or part of the community, or from an observer's perspective, etc., 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 etc.? A hot button issue from the world of journalism that can be applied here. Objectivity is a myth when the objective truth that we all have been fed has been from a white lens, which makes it all very subjective. Damage control time. I know what everyone's thinking right now. Can white people have good ideas? That might just be me. But absolutely, have you heard Paramore's music? Have you heard In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins? I'm so low. Have you seen Celine Dion live? Golden Girls, Reba, the person and the show? Top shelf white culture. Magnifique. Every piece of media that we consume should be scrutinized and critiqued in service of crafting a richer, more inclusive story. But unfortunately, people around the world have not been getting their daily dose of the truth when it comes to education about our historical narratives and cultural motivations. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said in her famous 2013 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, "The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar." Many people in this country have been fed a single story, and not only has that single story omitted many of us, been responsible for dangerous stereotypes and so divisiveness in the populace, it fed us an extremely whitewashed and heavily edited version of history. When examined under a microscope, a single story speaks to exceptionalism and the power dynamics in this country, but it keeps certain people subjugated, erasing all the traumas and atrocities committed, bringing us to now. The single story that we have been told through mass media and in our schools has only told one part of the story and downplayed how important the rest of the narrative is. All the way until recently, in textbooks where they tried to reframe American slavery as indentured servitude as opposed to chattel slavery, reframing native genocide in the 1830s as an eviction notice, and pretending that there were only like 6 people of color in New York on shows like Friends and Sex and the City. I'm out here now, there's mad people of color. The dangers of this are something that everyone has to navigate, and everyone must do their part to counteract. Not telling the whole story is dangerous. The truth is ugly, but knowing what educational gaps have been created from an experiential standpoint is why I like writing, because I can identify failures in understanding and try and find ways to fix them so that way the whole story gets to shine through and everybody gets represented. Yay! Letting people tell their full story is only a threat when you believe that only you know the truth. For those of us who are trying to find the truth, congratulations! You're doing a lot right now, trying to redo and undo at the same time. I'm not gonna pat you on the back, because COVID, but this is a step in the right direction. I was a 7th grade teacher at a school whose goal is to give students the space to tell their stories and to create opportunities for transformative justice and complete emotional processing. However, we were subjected to the pressures of standardized testing and having a lot of kids in a classroom at once, and that did not afford a lot of time to teach kids how to navigate skills like emotional intelligence or conflict resolution. I saw firsthand how, in place of space to grow from mistakes, shame became a band-aid solution when we had to kick kids out of the classroom or send them to the dean's office. Sometimes that loop never got closed, at least not in a way that was meaningful. I taught at a school of all black boys, a lot of which who came from environments that might have been similar to my own, and it was not lost on me that sometimes we ended up having to teach them how to survive the current broken world, not how to thrive in it. And once I had that fully conceptualized in my brain, it really broke my heart. At that age, not having any space to process the complex emotions that come with making mistakes or failures makes the shortcut of shame the normative reaction to failing a quiz or having a disagreement with a friend or genuine confusion, which leads us to the moment at hand. We have a culture that allows shame to supersede support, and that is causing real irreparable damage to the fabric that we're using to weave together our movements. Many of us are like Truman in The Truman Show. A lot of people accept the reality that they are presented with, and they leave it there. IRL, the reality we're presented with isn't great. It's full of one-sided lies and isn't complete without everyone's stories added to the mix. But if you don't know something that you were never taught, whose fault is that? Should we shame people for miseducation? Does that make things better? Short term? Yes, it's hilarious to drag people. I simply adore a good dragging. Long term, absolutely not. It's unhealthy and more of a reactive regulator than a proactive one. How many people do you know that don't know how to be wrong? Or don't know that multiple things can be true at once? Or is that person you? Not to become your therapist, but maybe question that later. Okay, now into your educational history. Find the class where they taught you emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, how to be wrong 201 plus lab and practicum. Can't find it, right? It's because those classes don't exist, at least not as prevalently as they should. Emotions involved in failure are often reinforced by feelings of shame, defensiveness, and shutting down. This causes people to fear conflicting ideas rather than engaging with them. Shame is involved in every aspect of our lives, whether it be socially prescribed through religion, family, friends, social status, etc., or individually prescribed through our own anxieties, self-esteem issues, and unprocessed trauma. I famously am in therapy, not because I want to be validated, not because I want to be told that I'm always right and a special little boy, but because adult life is ridiculous. A scam, one could say. And you need time to process all these different feelings all at once. Everyone at any age is capable of making mistakes and being wrong. However, some people like to spend their free time as the self-appointed gatekeepers of other people's growth without looking within. One of my creative mandates is to always create art from my inner child. Shows that I wish I had growing up so I could see myself in them, things that truly entertain me. When writing characters, I often consider that everybody is the hero in their own story. And when you're the hero in one story, sometimes it's hard to accept that you might be imperfect, make mistakes, or even be the villain in somebody else's. And sometimes not even like a Darth Vader level villain. I'm talking villain of the week, the day, the hour, the moment. It's quite literally the Shakespeare adage of all the world's a stage and all the men and women in it merely players. We have our exits and our entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Willie has some bars. This way of looking at the world is very Truman Show, which it should be clear is a movie I love. However, it does help explain how everybody experiences the world, especially using social media as our lenses into each other's lives, being both performer and audience simultaneously. As I said before, perspective is a crucial part of a good story, and when your perspective is that you are an infallible human who's incapable of being wrong, life has a way of showing you that your perspective is pretty whack. Especially if that perspective is informed by lifelong misinformation, stubborn perfectionism, and exceptionalism, especially on Twitter. There's a lot of time spent gatekeeping growth and not enough time spent cultivating it and supporting it. For instance, there are some people who can walk safely at night without being worried about anything. Let's call them men. Okay, that's too big of a generalization because I, as a black man, often don't feel safe walking around at night. This being said, my safety should not supersede or be less than a woman's, a trans person's, a non-binary person's, or a gender non-conforming person's feeling of safety walking at night. We are all entitled to having safety as a human right. So, if I'm in a conversation with someone and I say, I don't feel safe at night, and they say, I too don't feel safe at night, we should be able to come together and realize that the issue is none of us feel safe and focus on the reasons for that lack of safety. Not trying to outperform each other in the 2021 Safety Olympics, which should obviously take place in Keanu Reeves' arms, the safest place there is. I feel safer already. I, along with many people who went to school in the United States, know exactly what was left out of the textbooks that were treated as gospel on all of our tests and essays. Seeing the decontextualized, often inaccurate view of our own history has helped me understand that a lot of people that I interact with have never even questioned what they have been taught. At least not in any way to be on par with a person who actually comes from a marginalized community. Widening perspective should always be the goal, even for Worcester students. A lot of people went to Worcester thinking that this is the most people of color they've ever seen in their entire lives, like 10 Tyler Perry movies at once, while people that I went to school with knew that this was the bare minimum, like Christopher Nolan movies before Tenet. Both are right from their perspective. Not for nothing, a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, learned a lot in the last year, especially surrounding the murders of countless Black people early to middle of last year, added to the long, painful list of those we've lost to state-sanctioned and gendered violence in years past. I know this because everyone told me that they are now aware of what is going on and are going to do better. Sick, neat, dope. Have not heard that before. Some started reading books, sharing 7-slide Instagram infographics, posting black squares, turning the radio from Taylor Swift to Gil Scott-Heron when I got into their car. All their forms of turning individual awareness into individual action. But this isn't about solo edification or feeling good. It's about transformative change. And that can only exist when you take that step from individual awareness to collective action. There are millions, billions in the world right now who feel that justified frustration with awareness culture. If we don't know our history, or we know a sanitized, whitewashed version of it, we're doomed to get duped into believing that policing and prisons are the answers to rehabilitative and reformative systems again and again and again and again. Yo, imagine being 90 years old, living through one round of Nazis in the late 30s and early 40s, then near the end of your life, these new off-brand Nazi knockoffs in heavily starched Van Heusen polos are out here in the street again. I'll personally be extremely tight. Awareness has not always led to action historically. In fact, some populations, let's call them white people, are a little bit late to the game when it comes to issues of social justice and race, seeming to become aware of something that they already knew or already had been told over and over and over again. Through time, white people go through the ups and downs of awareness of the racial problems globally, often informed by incorrect media representation, a light shown on biased education models, and well, because they just don't want to learn about the Negro problem. Black and non-Black people of color are hyper aware of it, but they're not just aware of the problem, but also how little the problems surrounding race have changed in the last 50, 100, 150, or 200 years. These points of intersection where white awareness and BIPOC awareness meet are moments like the protests of last year, the protests surrounding Trayvon Martin, Amadou Diallo, Rodney King, the Civil Rights Movement, etc., etc. This continuum will continue as continuums are known to do. However, if things don't change and people of color are beholden to white people's awareness of their struggle and lack of action, the tensions are only going to build. Everything is relative, absolutely. Every single person brings a bit of their perspective on a situation to everything. Not to get all Orwellian, but the problem here is that subjective truth has superseded objective truth, where everyone wants their experience to be the center of everyone else's universe, when we all know the truth. Beyonce is the center of everyone's universe. If she's not, you're racist. I'm sorry, I'm just a messenger. It's the law, not my words. Reality is built by people coming as a collective, coming together to define truths. This is exceedingly difficult because we all have been fed mistruths, or at the very least, extremely biased subjective truths, ones that, when taken to their unchecked adult cognitive extremes, leave us with people who don't believe that racism is real, don't believe science is real, and believe the myth that the American dream is pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, when the reality is that so much of American industrial success was built on America pulling itself up by somebody else's bootstraps. If we're all in competition in this no-sum bootstrap off, nobody wins because neither side attempts to see the humanity in the other's point of view, only their own. What sucks is the more oppressed part of the population is held prisoner by the other side's hegemonic power to enforce their reality, a heavily edited one, as the truth. Marginalized people are then forced to see their oppressor's humanity, where there is nothing above them to enforce reciprocation. Equitable truth can only be created with space for all sides to listen to one another, not shouting over one another like a Facebook comment thread or a Twitter argument. The places we go to have conversation have been polluted by the money that can be made by sowing discord, spreading misinformation, and manipulating our human need for contact and connection against us, letting outrage and trauma, performed or not, become a digital currency. Social media gives us so much space to misinterpret one another, and to do so gleefully in a way that has become socially normalized. It's a place where nobody meets people where they are and normalizes the shame-based education system. Some person once tweeted the gospel that Twitter is a game of tag and you never want to be it. Absolutely, but it also is a place where rather than dealing with the systemic issues we have and work on ending the game, we go after individuals like it's a never-ending game of woke whack-a-mole because, let's face it, it's fun as hell. Don't get me wrong, social media is a good place for organizing, finding like-minded individuals, shooting your shot with an NBA player's ex, or your own, I'm not judging. However, when it comes to activism, it often ends at a hashtag or a retweet and needs to be taken offline at some point. It's deeper than just knowing the information. Infographics took over Instagram last year, and I know a lot of people learned a lot, myself included. But one thing that I feel like was missed is that a lot of people didn't realize how much of a privilege it is to learn about someone else's oppression, as opposed to being forced to live in it. We're aware, and that's awesome, but that's just the first step. Social media doesn't always have to be the bad guy all the time. A lot of our ugliest impulses come from what I talked about earlier. Growing up in a shame-based culture, never learning how to be wrong, lack of conflict resolution skills, lack of emotional intelligence, you know the vibes. Listen, I live, I laugh, I love as much as the next person. However, being an aware person of color is being cursed with knowledge that not a lot of your white peers know a damn thing about. For example, Karens. Is it hilarious that every time a white woman starts losing her entire mind at a Wawa or a Wegmans, someone starts recording? Yes, it's absolutely hilarious. However, taking it to a level deeper, it's a survival mechanism to hit record, just like it is with a police officer. BIPOC people gotta take every precaution in the book because they know what time it is when it's random black employee trying not to get COVID versus white lady with time, energy, and entitlement. It requires sitting down and listening to one another and seeing the situation from another person's point of view, which doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with that point of view, just that you hear it, and we're trying to create a solution that is for the collective good, one that allows us not to recreate the same mistakes in the future. But how do you get to this level of analysis or understanding if the road to it hasn't been paved in any healthy way? The hardest part? Imagining that future. That is the now. Imagining and then constructing a future where we all can live equitable, safe, healthy lives, free from all the tethers of the isms and the phobias that poison our social infrastructures. Things aren't going to get better unless we listen to one another instead of talking over each other, until we start seeing people where they are and not where we are, or where they want us to be, or where we want them to be. Every single social system that failed us, that led us to starting GoFundMes for each other's surgeries, rents, mental health check-ins, etc., came from somebody probably having a really good idea and then it getting bastardized for money or racist purposes along the way. If some wingding can lazily think up, let's put all the bad people in a building and say that we're rehabilitating them, when in actuality we're effectively ending their lives as they know them based on racist policies and practices, we can absolutely create a better system if we learn from the mistakes of the past. The most difficult part of creating a new future is that some people are comfortable with the one that we have or are okay with the piling discomforts because it seems insurmountable to change or to start from scratch. It's not insurmountable if we build it together. We have a lot of social pathologies that we are trying to fix or reform. However, how do you reform something that has been able to seep into our social consciousness and poison a lot of our thought processes, social functions, and governing systems over the last hundreds of years? The tenets of predatory and carceral capitalism, white supremacy, xenophobia, extremism, toxic patriarchy, transphobia, gender violence, sexual violence, ableism, war property, etc., 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 are all interlinked, and pieces of it litter everything from our daily systems to our daily conversations. It takes work to excise these from our collective cultural consciousness, but it starts with the individual. Comedy and writing are one of the ways that I choose and have the privilege of contributing to a more radical future, infusing characters that I write with my values that always center the community. I guarantee that anyone can find a way to do similar work in their industry, in academia, in science, and even in anti-racist work. I mean, this whole country is built on exploiting black people, poor people, and immigrants. Just dig a little bit and you'll find something. Some of y'all don't even have to dig. I understand. This may sound a little naive. Are you saying that if we all just read some books and be kinder to one another, we can beat racism and have it turn to dust like Thanos? Yes and no, but mostly yes. Listen, I get clowned day in and day out by my activist friends for being too patient. As I sat in my Brooklyn apartment during the pandemic, I thought about all the ways in which I've been exceedingly patient with people who took advantage of that patience. I don't regret giving people the space and time to work their shit out. Can't change the past. I reflected on previous videos I made on such topics, which may have been a little bit too patient, too short, or gave people too much space so they could wriggle out of any sort of social responsibility, accountability, and culpability. That can't continue. This doesn't work unless we are all invested in a better future for everyone, not just ourselves. That is going to be incredibly difficult because it's going to require some people letting go of things like resources, power, social status, and money, and not expect something in return, something that this country and many of its citizens struggle with. I can't want you to change more than you want to change. I gave myself a mandate when I finally burned out. I can point people in the right direction, but I can't make them do the work, nor can I do the work for them, but I will work with you. In Freedom Dreams, the Black Radical Imagination, author Robin Kelley says, can we all get along long enough to make a revolution? The same things take down every single sort of cultural revolution. Clinging to old modes of leadership, men taking up too much space, personality and style clashes that slowly poison the movement. But now that we know that, how do we interrupt it? Now that we know history, what are we actually doing to stop it from repeating? Getting along requires getting on the same page, which requires a stronger support of fully contextualized historical accuracy to form the truth, which requires meeting people where they are, which requires patience, which requires love, and building our personal relationships, not just breaking them when they may fumble and stumble. Echoing prison abolitionist Mariam Kaba, what we create from the ashes of systems that aren't working for us may not be perfect. It may not work 100% of the time and will need to be tweaked, adjusted, and like our Constitution, will be a living structure that will need upkeep. At the end of the day, in conclusion, therefore, and so on and so forth, there is a lot of work to be done, but less work if we all do the work on ourselves while also trying to work on a better world. This is reading, sharing information, sitting down with that difficult relative and having that hard conversation, learning how to imagine a perfect world for people from all walks of life. There are a million ways to help do your part and be part of the conversation. And if the last 4 years, hell, the last year is any indication, when people organize to stand up for what they believe in and to center the more vulnerable in our communities and in the world, we can get anything done. Awareness is the first step. Let's commit to action and take the next step together. Here's where my line is drawn, and here's some free game tips and tricks that help guide me that hopefully can guide you. It's not about talking to people, it's about listening to people. Community is an investment in each other, so reject toxic individualism and build with you and yours. Fight defensiveness and blame and uplift a growth mindset. Divest from the good-bad binary in favor of the gray area and championing nuance. Reject hierarchies and these social stratifications in favor of supporting the most vulnerable in our communities and provide them with their human rights, the same ones that we all should have of safety, shelter, food and water, and create the safety that is all-inclusive. Prioritize healing, abolish celebrity, and oh yeah, capitalism, thief of all of these goals. In the spirit of recontextualizing the American single narrative, the work of social justice is not bound by borders. It is a global initiative that includes activists and stories from all around the world, fighting parallel battles with little to no coverage. Shout out to all the activists from London to Rio, Paris to Lagos, we see you out here. Sometimes we are moved to try and fix the whole situation by ourselves, to tend to a garden that is overrun with weeds, to change someone's heart and mind all in one fell swoop, but unlearning and relearning are processes that we're asking everyone to do at the same time, and we all don't learn or process the same way. At the very least, plant a seed, let it take root, help it bloom, but sometimes you don't need to be there at every moment, but check in. Not to sound like a broken record, but listen to one another. Back to Chimamanda's TED Talk, stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and malign, but stories can also be used to empower and humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. Sometimes listening is just listening, not adding, not trying to relate, not one-upping. Everyone's stories matter, and I'm willing to put it on wax right now in front of all y'all that I will work my entire life to make sure as many people's stories get told. That is my calling, that is how I choose to make my mark, by helping everyone else make theirs. Everything in this piece is for me as much as it is for you. Constantly, I have to remind myself of everything that I talked to you about today. I do not say this from a place of standing above you or beneath you, but as someone standing beside you. I could not have done it without all the friends and family that have guided me along the way, stood by me in difficult times, taught me when I needed to be taught, and listened to me when I needed to be listened to, and talked to me when I needed talking to. These are the relationships that mean the most in my life and in my world, and we all have those people in our lives in some capacity, so I challenge you to strengthen those relationships and hold them close and each other accountable for this difficult work that only gets done if we all go it together. Thank you, Mom, and thank you, Dad, for giving me a gift of a beautiful lens that I get to look at the world through. The women and femmes in my life, my biological sister, my chosen ones, thank you so much for your grace, your patience, and the privilege of being part of your lives. Y'all know who you are. My brothers, home and abroad, I see you and love you. To the sun, last but not least, thank you to Worcester, the town and the university. As little as there may have been to do in the actual town, my Worcester education has cultivated my curiosity, giving me a testing ground to find out what I want to do in the world and set out to do it, wanting to learn, grow, and better myself in a plethora of ways that makes it my honor to give back to the university in this way. Thank you for inviting me, thank you for listening, and please, for the love of God, stay masked up until you hear the opening flute notes to Mask Off by Future coming out of the White House. Keep the masks on, free all the prisoners, power to all the people, free Bobby Shmurda, peace. And I'm serious, don't you dare use charcuterie in anything. It's horrible and we all know it.
Thank you all again for tuning into this year's Martin Luther King Jr. Day events. In the spirit of transformative education, we invite you now to join us in this afternoon's virtual social justice dialogues. I urge you all to take a step out of your comfort zones, join us in sessions, and actively participate with topics you might not be too familiar with, but are vital to strengthening that education on a variety of social justice topics. To close with the words of our honored MLK Jr., the function of education is to teach one to think attentively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education.